everyone. Hi, welcome to another episode of Akiona Law. I am Lonnie Akiona, and in this podcast, we talk about everything and anything that intersects in the arena of family law and divorce. And today I have family law attorney Jules Butler. Welcome to the show, Jules.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And Jules has been doing family law since 2009, and you're currently at the law offices of Vic Lamb, located in Seattle, Washington. Although I can see right now from my Zoom camera, it looks like you are working out of your home office as well, so am I.
That's right.
And then Jules, now, do you do anything else? I mean, I'm sorry, because I know you do more than just family law, right? What
I
other
do.
areas of law do you do?
Do a lot of civil litigation, and civil litigation, as you know, can be all sorts of things, from contract disputes to landlord-tenant issues to personal injury, all sorts of stuff. No tax law, no bankruptcies.
Okay. And so in today's podcast episode with Jules, we're going to be talking about recovery and the family law attorney. And specifically, when we talk about recovery and we talk about family law, there's a big intersection that you see in your practice between alcohol and drug abuse.
Yeah.
And when we say recovery, we mean when someone is struggling with drug and alcohol abuse, normally they to get better, you have to engage in some sort of recovery somehow, because it's an addiction. And it doesn't matter if you're drug and alcohol addiction, eating disorder addictions. The whole theory of recovery is in a way that you're running on self-will, and what can I do to rely on something other to get out of this habit? Do you
Well,
expound on what I just said?
yeah, I mean, I think there's different kinds of recovery. You know,
Right.
there are more there are spiritual-based recoveries, which I ascribe to, and there are recoveries that reject a spiritual approach. And
Yeah.
I think I mean, I found a way that works for me, as a spiritual-based recovery worked for me when nothing else really did. But that's not to say that there aren't other valid treatments that do work for other people. I think the important thing here is some kind of recovery that will be effective enough to do the trick, right? So
Right.
whatever that is, kind of thing. And in the family law context, we see that with how addiction, particularly drug and alcohol addiction, um, it affects the ability of the parent to effectively parent. You see all sorts of negligence and abuse kind of stuff, and it's that right there that, as attorneys and the courts, are primarily concerned with when we're trying to fashion a parenting plan with some of these problems.
Yeah, and going into fashioning a parenting plan and alcohol and drug addiction, what we're going to talk specifically about is the 191 restrictions. And 191 restrictions is essentially restrictions that the court puts into place on a parenting plan. And the restrictions basically restrict a parent's time to see a child. And and what's interesting, and the restrictions can be due to different reasons. One of them could be to abuse, neglect, domestic violence, or addiction. So we're going to talk about when you're a family law attorney and you're dealing with someone that has drug and alcohol addictions, and you're talking about imposing 191 restrictions, that to you means what? So say, yeah, am I too broad?
Yeah, can you rephrase the question?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll present hypotheses. So say, for example, I'm a client and I come to you and I talk about, okay, so hey Jules, I'm in a program that deals with alcohol, and I've been sober 5 years, but I had a slip up recently and I went back out drinking. But I'm back in the program and I'm back in my recovery again, and I've got 7 months sober, 7 months from not doing alcohol. And I'm going through a divorce with my husband. And I know my husband is going to use this against me, but I've been the stay-at-home mom, and I don't think that slip up should be used against me. And he doesn't support my recovery because I've asked him to put away his bottles of whiskey, but he leaves whiskey and everything all around the house. And I think I should remain the primary parent, the custodial parent for our son, but I'm afraid he's going to use my slip up against me and and he's going to be the primary parent, and he shouldn't, because he doesn't really, he's working a lot, and I don't feel like this one slip up should be used against me. Like, how would you, and so in that situation, like, right, we're talking about, she's worried the husband is going to go to court and ask the court, because of her drinking problem, the court enter 191 restrictions against her, meaning that he's the child's primary parent and her time be supervised or what have you. So what would be your approach to that type of situation?
So this is a very long conversation that I'm having with this client.
Yes.
And the first thing that I am going to ask about is her history with drug and alcohol use and abuse. I want to have a really solid understanding of what that looks like, how it's manifested, how it's affected her relationship with her husband, how it's affected her ability to parent her child. And I'm also thinking about, is there any way that this marriage can be salvaged?
Oh,
I often like to explore that first. And I also like to try and explore, and it really depends on the history, but if I can get these guys to talk amongst themselves and work something out, and then great. I say, if they say, yeah, I think I can talk to him, then I say, great, go and talk to him. I give certain advice about what things to ask for, certain when we talk about parenting plan, think about the weekends, think about the holidays, to just come up with a broad structure. If you guys can agree, come back to me, I'll draft up the paperwork. We'll do this as friendly and cheaply as possible. If that's not the case, there's just no way it's going to happen. This marriage is dead. There's no way to say, to try to get them to go back. Then like I said, I want to know her history. I want to know how long she was sober before, what she did to get sober, how she stayed sober, how she got drunk, how long she was out, what happened while she was out, and what happened that she came back, and what has she been doing since she's come back. Then I want to know about his drinking. You say that he's leaving bottles all over the place, and he refuses to put them away. And I think to myself, what kind of supportive husband is that? If you don't have a drinking problem, how easy is it to just, at the very least, put your liquor away? What's the big deal? So that sparks in my mind, because now I'm thinking strategically, what issue can we exploit on his side to sort of undermine his claim that he should be the one to have sole custody. I also kind
okay,
of
well, let me throw you this for a loop ball.
okay.
Okay, so let's take away the fact that it's not drinking. Let's say it's prescription pain meds, right? And that's a common thing that
Sure.
I see, that you must see in family law too, that addiction to prescription pain meds. And so it's the husband's prescription that the wife is abusing, and he's not putting it away. Isn't it part of the recovery that, hey, you're responsible for your own actions? You can't necessarily blame the fact that husband's not putting away his prescription pain meds, that he's not locking it up. It's in a way, it's saying that you can't place your recovery in someone else's hands, because you ultimately are responsible for your own recovery.
Yeah, but I think at the beginning of this conversation, this hypothetical conversation, I think there's more information that needs to be gathered first.
Mm,
I want to know, how is it that she came to be addicted to these pain medications? Well, did she have a surgery?
mm.
How is it that he happens to have the same pain medications that she got hooked on? Was he the one that got her hooked on the pain medications? That matters, because if there's a dynamic where he's been using pain meds or drugs basically to somehow control or undermine her ability to to argue for custody for the kids, I think that's going to matter. Yes, of course, at some point during that same conversation, I am going to say he's absolutely going to try to use this against you, because if I were his attorney, I would too. and what are you doing so that you can escape this situation from him? You know, can you get out of the house? You know, if you're really serious about getting into recovery and getting away from this, then you got to do what you got to do in order to not be subject to that. And that means if you take the kids and you take off because it's just too dangerous otherwise, then you do it. You know, you go stay with your sister or your mother or a good friend or whatever. Let's explore that and see what that might look like. But it's very fact specific in terms of what I would think would need to be done next.
Right. Fact specific, I think, answers the question a lot in family law. Well, what if this and this happened? And the answer is it depends. And I think especially when you're, like if I'm representing the side that has the addiction problem and they come to me in that scenario and they say, I'm worried that they're going to use my drinking or my drug use against me, it really plays on to, okay, what are you doing now? Right? What did you go to treatment? How long have you been clean and sober? What are you doing about your sobriety? Did you just go to treatment and then that's it? Or are you actively working a program of recovery where you're attending meetings, you're working with the sponsor, you have a home group, a service position, whatever that recovery requirement is I think is a standard that is, if you're on that end side, if you have the addiction, you've got to actively show the court that, yes, I have an addiction. I admit it, I messed up, but here are the proactive, or here are the steps I'm taking to combat that addiction. I kind of see it in my head no different, like, yes, I have, I'm allergic to strawberries. And so here's the steps that I'm doing to manage that allergy.
Right.
I'm not eating anything related to strawberries.
Well, right. And so, I mean, I think this hypothetical that I've been imagining, it assumes that this person has found some sort of path to recovery that is working, and that the slip truly is a one-time slip. That I'm not going to see affidavits from his witnesses that are going to talk about a history of slips and being unavailable for the kids. So assuming that everything this person is telling me is the truth, and this slip happened because, her husband, who got her hooked on these drugs in the first place, is not doing anything to help her. Yeah, then we start talking about, maybe we need to get this guy out of the house, or you need to get out of the house. We just need to see how it goes. But if this isn't actually a one-time thing, and the thing you have to remember about alcoholics and drug addicts is that they lie, even to their attorneys, even when you tell them not to, they lie. And so I have to take everything that they say with a grain of salt. I mean, I don't tell them, look, you're a dope fiend and I know you're lying, because that's not good for the relationship. But I do ask questions like, who can I talk to about this situation? What witnesses can we provide to establish everything that we've been talking about? And if they don't have witnesses, that's a red flag. For example, if they're very, I mean, it's sort of funny, like if they're not detailed enough, or if they're too detailed, those both are red flags, depending on sort of how it comes out. But if I figure out, either during that initial consultation or soon thereafter, that they're BSing me, and then I will tell them, you're gonna lose. I mean, I can get you custody, but it's just going to be a matter of, I might be able to get you custody, but it's just going to be a matter of time before you screw up again. And frankly,
Right.
I don't know if I'll even be able to get you custody, because under these facts, the court is really not, they're not going to want to put the kids in danger. And right now, you pose a danger. I've said that to clients before. I've gotten clients custody and then they've blown it. And all I can say at that point is, I don't know what to tell you. You're spending money for nothing. I'm spending all this time going to court and making these arguments, and then you're going out and getting drunk again. So maybe the kids are better off with him after all. And if not, then you better come up with something that really makes the husband a monster in order to counteract that. And you better still be able to show that you're still able to parent, because maybe the court wants to give the kids to the grandparents.
That's an interesting, that's an interesting question right there. The ability to show the court that you can still parent. I remember I had, because there's hypotheticals, or there's situations that happen where people may come to you and say, hey, and I see this a lot with the marijuana smoking, where people say, so and so, my ex smokes marijuana a lot. I say in front of your child, no, not in front of the child, but I know he smokes all the time when we're together, he smokes all the time. But then it comes down to, well, does it affect the parenting? Is he able to take the child to school on time? Is he able to assist, is the child able to attend school? Is he helping the child with the classes? Because there's that realization, as frustrating as it may be, yes, he may have an addiction to marijuana, but if it doesn't negatively impact his parenting time, then the courts aren't necessarily going to have a problem with it.
And rightly so.
And
Rightly
rightly
so.
so.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not one of those people that thinks that alcohol use in and of itself is somehow evil, or marijuana use in and of itself is somehow evil. My understanding and view on it is that, particularly with alcohol, that most of the people who drink just fine, and that's really just sort of a small number of the total people who drink who have a problem with that, and it's an even smaller subset of people who are heavy drinkers who are actually alcoholics. And so I think it's very easy to slip into this sort of moral judging kind of thing, and I think that's dangerous. I think it's dangerous as someone who is in recovery and looking to provide help to people who might want it. And it's dangerous as an attorney who is looking to not only, in my view, properly counsel my client, but also try and get my client what he or she wants. If I approach this as a moral issue,
Okay.
I'm already starting off on my heels, because I'm going to be arguing this differently, assuming that everybody's on board that it's a bad thing, and just by virtue of their use alone, that's enough to create an issue.
Right.
I've seen plenty of people argue that. I don't think it's a winning argument. You got to be detailed,
Yeah.
and I'm more than happy to fight against the commissioner if they start going there and remind them of what the law is. These things are legal. So show me, if you show me that your depression impacts your parenting, I'm going to get restrictions based on your depression. That's not a moral issue.
Did you say if your profession impacts your parenting?
Depression.
Oh, your depression. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I suppose your profession too. I mean, really, that's actually funny that you say that. It's anything that impacts your parenting, really. There's no limit.
Right.
If you go skiing so much that you lose your house and can't feed your kids, well, now your skiing becomes an issue, doesn't it? If you play video games or have train, whatever it is that makes you incapable of showing up for your kids, the best interest of the children, when you're setting up an initial final parenting plan, that's the only thing the court cares about. It doesn't matter why something is not in the best interest of the children, just that it is. And the last thing that go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that's you said it so well that it's not necessarily the fact that someone is using drugs or alcohol that the court is going to be upset with, even if the person is smoking marijuana on a daily basis, because if it doesn't negatively impact the parenting plan, then in the court's viewpoint, it's not a problem until it does. Right. And it's hard to kind of bring that point across because, like you said, sometimes it's not necessarily like you were saying, it's that taking that moral high ground. Well, I don't like it. I don't like the fact that he smokes marijuana every day. And as a parent, I don't know if I would be comfortable too co-parenting with a husband that smoked marijuana on a daily basis. But at the same time, as a lawyer, I know objectively, well, if he can still take the kids to school, still take the kids through the activities, it's not negatively impacting his parenting plan. I basically know there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, unless you can get sole decision making, your comfort level with me doing something that's legal and not affecting my parenting doesn't factor into this.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because you mentioned that you're in recovery, and how do you handle when you're an advocate for your client? You're an advocate of your client's in position, your family law attorney, what the court looks at, but at the same time, what do you do when you see that your client has a drug and alcohol problem? How do you use your own experience in recovery?
Well, it depends. Like,
It depends.
it depends.
It
And it's
depends.
fact specific, right? So as someone who is fairly deeply involved in the spiritual based recovery process, I'm always sort of open to ways in which I can help sort of carry that message, which is, if you drink like I do, this is what I did. I don't drink anymore. If you do what I did, you can have relief from that too. I mean, that's essentially in a nutshell what that message is. Most people who are in the middle of alcoholism or drug addiction, they're not open or receptive to that. And when you factor in, when they're coming to me as a divorce attorney, 9 times out of 10 in my experience, maybe 8 times out of 10 in my experience, there is a whole history of rancor and sort of stuffed resentment, and the other side can do no right, and they just hate the other person, so that them breathing in and out is enough to be a problem. And so it can be sometimes difficult, depending on the way that the client or potential client's symptoms manifest. It can be difficult to get through to that. But sometimes it's clear. Sometimes it's clear that this person's alcohol or drug addiction is a real problem. My experience was with alcohol, so it's a little easier for me to deal with someone who's just an alcoholic than it is on the level that I'm talking about right now, than it is to someone who is a drug addict. But that's just because I can't relate in the same way. But I don't think that's necessarily required at the stage that we're talking about. The stage we're talking about, and again, this falls more on a personal level with attorney as counselor rather than attorney as advocate. I'm looking to see if they're receptive to maybe changing the way things are going. And while coming to me as a divorce attorney and they want to get the other side and they're worried that they're not going to get enough money and they're going to lose their kids and all of that, sometimes, once in a while, it could be that catalytic moment in their life where things have gotten so bad and now they've lost their marriage and they're facing losing their kids. And
The
maybe,
bottom.
well, to the extent, yeah, I don't think that there's a bottom, because I think that implies there's a level below which you cannot go. I think you can always go lower and lower. You can get to a point where you have a moment of clarity and you're willing to kind of see things differently and try new things. And then if you don't sort of do anything about it at that moment, in my experience at least, you sort of forget all of that and then you get to sink even lower. So I think of these as sort of windows of opportunity, right? So this is a moment in this person's life where they're seeing things clearly, that the consequences are so hard and so rapid and so serious that they're sort of shocked out of their delusion for a moment, and they might be receptive. At that point, yeah, you want to strike while the iron's hot, and I'm more than happy to talk to them about that. And if it's appropriate, to disclose to them my own experience. Now, it's not often appropriate, because it isn't. A lot of times I can have that conversation without the need to talk about my own experience, but sometimes I will. And so that's I think separate from my advocate hat, which, as an advocate, I'm always looking for a strategy, for an angle. How can I use this to advance my client's wishes? Now, sometimes I'll try to mold what they want to have happen based on what I think they're able to do. Just like let's say that we get this and they're just going to be a mess. Well, you sure you really want that? Is that really what's going to be in your kid's best interest? Let's flush this out and see what that looks like. And so
you're talking about, like, so if you're having a client that's in active addiction and they're saying, I want primary residential custody, you'll say, are you sure this is what you really want right now? Because you're drinking 3 bottles of wine a day. Are you sure that's in your kid's best interest? But I mean, is that client receptive to that, to hearing that type of hard truth?
It depends, right? Not always, right? I mean, it's like that question right there, that comes after I've already established that they're able to think clearly enough to be able to have that conversation. I've also had clients that they're nowhere near, they're in such denial about what they're into. There's no way I'm gonna be able to get through to them. And
Right.
sometimes I don't take those cases, sometimes I do, and I just, I mean, to be honest with you, sometimes getting what they want and blowing it is a really great consequence for them.
Oh,
Um,
I see.
I've got one, can think of at least a few different clients, one in particular, where I got that client what they wanted, and they couldn't stop drinking, and it eventually led to some sobriety that's actually been able to turn things around. But it took going back to court, the father going back to court several times because of the drinking to
Yeah.
get this client to that place. And so, I mean, at some point, either I'm willing to do the job or I'm not. And if I am willing to do the job, I mean, I have to just trust that, sort of in the grand scheme of things, the universe is going to have happen what it wants to have happen. And I just do my part to try to act honorably and sort of, pray and hope for the best kind of thing.
Right. Kind of leave it up to it's part of that concept of recovery. Leave it up to the higher power. And what's supposed to happen is meant to happen. And all I can do is just, take the action, leave the results up to the higher power in a way. But I get what you're saying, it's just that tension of being a counselor for your client when you're in recovery balances that I'm an advocate and what can I do strategically here, knowing that you're either an active addiction and there's only so much I can do, or based on my recovery experience, and I know how to strategize or game plan how to position your slip up, assuming the client is engaged back in recovery. I know how to strategize out to the court to present you in the best light possible,
Sure, if that's true.
if that's true.
And that's the thing, that the last thing I want to do is ruin my credibility before these same commissioners and judges that I'm going to be continuing to appear before in other cases. So
Right.
I want to make sure that what I'm representing to be the case, I do my due diligence to make sure it's the case. Also, I don't want to set up my client for failure if I can avoid it. I'm very happy, even if they're not receptive. Because part of it is just, it's sort of a business thing, is to manage the client's expectations. The last
Right.
thing I want to do is say, oh yeah, and then we lose. We're gonna be fine, and then we lose. I know we're gonna lose. You've drank every night for the last 7 days, and you keep showing up to work naked. You're not gonna get your kids. So I think that's a conversation that's important to have, both as counselor and as advocate.
Well, so here's the thing. I mean, and this kind of just this plays into the tension of being a counselor, being in recovery, and being a family law advocate. So you have a client that comes to you and they're not in recovery, they're just sober. So in a way, what it's called like the dry drunk or whatever. Like how do you gain that? So I mean, because like talking from recovery, right, like in a way that your sobriety is not going to last unless you do something proactive. You just can't abstain from alcohol. Well, I mean, I guess some people can, but in reality, to have that true spiritual experience, it's helpful to have a program recovery rather than just staying sober. So I guess in terms of being the family law advocate, you just kind of proceed, well, hey, Your Honor, yes, my client used to drink a lot, but he hasn't drank for 8 months or a year. He's fine. But in the back of are you counseling that client? Hey, maybe you should really look into this program or this program.
Well, it depends. So you have to keep in mind what I mentioned earlier, which is that not everybody who drinks problematically is an alcoholic.
Right.
The primary difference between, hard drinkers and alcoholics, that's sort of the
Yeah.
categories, right? And
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
hard drinkers, when they drink, it looks very alcoholic. The distinction between a hard drinker and an alcoholic is that a hard drinker can stop drinking if that person is given a sufficiently good reason to do it. The doctor says, look, Jack, you're going to die if you don't stop drinking. Or the wife or the husband says, I'm done. I'm fed up. I'm out of here. I can't take it anymore. And it's enough to shock that person, and they just stop. They grow up, or whatever it is, they
Yeah.
decide that they want to stop, and then they're able to stop. Now with the alcoholic decides that they want to stop. They do in fact want to stop, but they're
Yeah.
not able to stop. And that's a whole other process that happens mentally and physically to the alcoholic that doesn't happen to the hard drinker. So I mean, that's another reason why I think it's, for me at least, uh, it's important to understand the distinction, because I'm going to give someone the benefit of the doubt. I'm not going to assume, in fact, I don't assume that just because they've had some negative consequences as a result of their drinking, that they're an alcoholic. I'm going to conclude initially that they have a problem with alcohol. And I'm going to tell them, well, look, you got to stop drinking, right? Yeah, I can do it. Okay, great. So here's what we're going to do. And the game plan that I come up with might be,
Okay.
look, I think it's important for you to go through a rehab of some kind. Even hard drinkers need to be dried out. And
Yeah.
hard drinkers, oftentimes need to understand sort of the nature of drinking and physiologically what it does, even to non-alcoholics. And I say, and it'll look good to the court. So, you're gonna go,
It'll look good in court.
yeah, absolutely, right?
It'll
Because
look,
that's what we're doing at this point, is we're strategizing a package that we can present to the court so that the court can feel comfortable that this person is done with their alcohol problem. So if they're currently drinking, stop. Are you open to going to rehab? That one can be a little dicey, because depending on the rehab they go to, some rehabs, I don't know if they require, but the part of their program is that you leave us and then you go to AA. I think they tend to take the approach that everybody that comes to us needs to go to AA or NA. And I don't necessarily want to saddle someone with the requirement to go to 12-step meetings in order to get their kids. All I want to do is show that they've gone to a treatment program, they've successfully completed it, they've taken a series of maybe urine tests, to just show
okay.
a consistency of sobriety, and then time, right? So what I want is, I want to get a temporary order that's going to maintain the status quo, whatever the parenting situation is, while they go through all of this other stuff. And that can be a heavy lift at the temporary order period. And it's going to just depend on what this person did or didn't do in terms of their parenting.
So, I mean, I think my problem is that I can suggest that someone go to treatment, but I have yet to anyone actually follow up on that suggestion.
Well, right. So then here's the other thing, I'm gonna, you're paying me a lot of money an hour to help you strategize how to deal with this.
Right.
You can do it or not. And if you
Yeah.
don't do it, then okay, what can you show me that to prove to the court that you haven't had a drink since X, whenever it was that you claim it? Oh, nothing? How about witnesses? Oh, nothing? Well, what do you want me to do, man?
What about the urine test? Right. Yeah. There's only so much we can do.
That's exactly right. And if they haven't stopped drinking, so this is the other part of this. I never assume someone's an alcoholic just because they come to me. I go through that process. And if they keep drinking, now I have a different conversation with them. So, we've been talking about this for a while, sir. And you and I discussed you're going to stop drinking. And you and I discussed how important it was for you to stop drinking in order for you to keep your kids, right? Right.
Right.
Okay, so what happened? And I'm going to go through each and every time. And in that way, we're going to talk about, and this is what I do when I sponsor people, when I'm sort of helping people get sober just in my personal life. I walk through, this is something that you say is important to you. Why weren't you able to do it? Let's explore that. If they're open to having that conversation with me, then
Okay.
often there can be sort of a breakthrough there. And again, that to me serves dual functions. It helps me to help them, which is an integral part of my recovery. But it also advances the work that I have to do as their family law attorney. And if they
Now,
don't do it, then, well, dude, I don't know what to tell you, man. You get what you get,
now I've going back to between the hard drinker and the alcoholic, in my experience as a family law attorney, man, I would say, like, I would say 10 times out of 10, it's not a hard drinker, it's an alcoholic. Like, have you really experienced that, where someone came to you either as a client or an opposing party, and they're truly the hard drinker and they're able to stop, and it's not like they had that addiction?
No,
Okay. Okay, I was just wondering.
but I don't
I-
assume that. I
I'm sorry, what? Say that again?
I don't assume that they're alcoholics. That's
Yeah.
and
Okay.
it's possible that they might not be.
Yeah.
And to be again, I don't personally care if someone drinks however much they
Right.
drink. It's none of my business. I don't care at all. Go with God, do your thing, you know. But if it impacts your life in a negative way that you can no longer stand, or if it's getting in the way of you achieving something in court that you want to achieve, well, then it becomes my business, and we need to have a hard conversation about that. And I can't have the conversation about why haven't you stopped drinking when we discussed that this was the game plan and you told me how important this was. Like, that's an important thing that you have to set up properly. If I come at someone assuming they're an alcoholic
Yeah.
and I don't know them, and don't have any kind of history, I know when I was still drinking, there's no way in hell you're going to get through to me. Oh, you're just one of those crusaders. You know, you just want to get everybody sober, and you think everyone's bad who drinks. You have no credibility with me. So, you know, we're going to start off assuming that you're a hard drinker. I'm going to start off assuming, which is normally what people tell me, oh, I can quit anytime. Okay, great. So do. Great. And so this is what we're going to do. You can quit anytime. Great. You're going to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I'm going to create this package. We're going to present it to the court. I'm going to see if we can negotiate something before leaving it to the ref, and we're going to see what we can work out. Now we're set up to have that other conversation if they drink anyway.
Well, let's flip it around. So let's say the wife is coming to you. The wife does not have the drinking problem, but the husband does. And so the wife is describing to you the husband's drinking, and based on your own experience, you're like, this guy sounds like he used to drink how I did.
Yeah.
Do you start out presuming, okay, so your husband may be an alcoholic, and this is, we're going to ask for 191 restrictions. We're going to ask you to do drug alcohol evaluation, go into a treatment program. Like, do you use your own personal experience?
I do,
Okay.
but even preliminary to all of that, I have
Okay.
kind of a different conversation. So I mean, I'd say 10 times out of 10, when this sort of thing comes up, I'll listen. I usually spend a lot of time just listening. I'll ask probing questions. I'll get them to talk to me so I can sort of get an idea of what we're dealing with. And usually it's peppered with a lot of invective. They're just so resentful, and they just go on and on about the drinking, and it's so horrible. And at some point,
Right.
I'll stop them and I'll say, okay, I understand that. This is why you're getting divorced from this person. You
Yeah.
don't have to deal with this anymore. Isn't that fantastic? So now let's, right? Because now that I understand, I spent enough time with this person, and now I understand what we're dealing with. I'm not interested anymore in listening to someone complain about their drunk of a husband. I don't care about that. What I care about is, how specifically has that impacted his treatment of the kids, his involvement in life? Has he been abusive to you? What does that look like? Do you have witnesses? Do you have documents, emails, text, anything to corroborate this story? Then I'm going to say, have you considered Al-Anon? What I'll usually do is I'll say what I said. Fortunately, you're divorcing him. I'll say, people don't usually divorce folks that they don't hate, and he gets to be an asshole, and you get to not have to deal with him anymore.
Okay.
So that's great. So if they can let it go and get down to business with me, then I'll usually let it go. If they just keep harping on it, then I'll talk about, look, there are places that you can go with people who have similar problems. And I'll sort of broach it, sort of a little more delicately to see if they're receptive, and suggest Al-Anon. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever gone to Al-Anon when I've suggested that. All I can do is just sort of throw it out there. And
why don't you define what is Al-Anon for people who don't know?
Al-Anon is a 12-step program for the spouses and family members of alcoholics. The thing about alcoholism is it doesn't affect just the sufferer, just the person who's drinking. It affects everyone whose lives they touch. I mean, if anyone who's ever known an alcoholic or been an alcoholic, that you rip through your own life, and anyone else who is sort of stupid enough to stick around long enough for you to screw them over, kind of thing.
Oh, geez. Hard truth. Okay, but going back, my question was like, and you said wonderful things to this client. Do you tell them, like, look, in my own personal experience with drinking, this is what it sounds like, or do you not even share that?
In fact, that's never necessary. It's never been necessary for me to disclose Sometimes I have, because maybe I feel like there's a connection and it feels like it would be appropriate and receptive.
Yeah.
But usually I don't, because it doesn't matter. All I need to say, I'm not a member of Al-Anon. So, and I'm not an Al-Anon. I don't have that particular aspect of the alcoholic disease, where I'm trying to pull people out of bars and stop them from drinking. As I just established, I don't care if people drink or not, right? So
Yeah.
go do your thing. And if someone becomes a problem, my instinct is to sort of bail than it is to sort of stick it out and suffer, right? So I don't have whatever the Al-Anon has, kind of thing. So
Oh, I see.
I'm just saying to the client, like, I know about this thing. I have seen people in your situation. This might be helpful to you. I'm not going to say it will be, because I don't know. And the last thing I want to do is for them to come back and say, I tried it, Al-Anon, and maybe we had a bad meeting and it didn't
Yeah.
work. And now I've lost credibility with my client. It's just a suggestion. And again, the only point, well, there's 2 points. Again, one, to try to help them find some other way to process this, or talk to some friends, whatever it takes. But the point is you've got to get past this. You've got to get past this and let go. Can you do
Right.
that? Because now we have work to do. Right now I need evidence. I need witnesses. I need to talk to them. I need to start building declarations and motions. And either you have the goods, or you're just sort of resentful and complaining, and maybe using the fact that he drinks a couple of times a week against him, kind of thing. I don't know until I have this conversation with him.
Right. It goes back to, is a person's drinking or drug use negatively impacting the parenting of the kids, versus you just think they drink or smoke too much, but they're still able to perform the parenting functions.
Or yeah, I mean, I've seen very similar arguments with regard to a husband's gaming. Oh, he's got a gaming
Ooh,
addiction. I've seen it with
yeah.
trains. Oh, all he does is spend all his time up in his trains. He doesn't care about his kids. I mean, it doesn't matter what the
Yeah.
thing is. There's a thing that the potential client believes is causing all the problems, and they're harping and harping and harping on it. Maybe it's a problem, maybe it isn't. Part of my job is to set them straight about what a real problem is and what a real problem isn't. And most of the time, in fact, I can't think of a time that hasn't worked, where I just sit someone down and I'm like, you got to move off of this. You got to knock it off. Just, that's not a thing. The court doesn't care about that. Let's talk about this instead. Most of the time, people go along with it.
Yeah. So in terms of going back to, so if you were representing, so let's say the husband came to you and said, hey, I want to get primary custody of my kids. My wife had a pill prescription problem. She was clean for 4 years. She relapsed. Now she's been clean for almost a year, but I'm afraid she's going to relapse again. Like, what do you tell that guy who's trying to say, I think I should be the primary residential parent?
Well, the first thing I want to know is what's the basis of your fear? Is there something imminent going on? If he says, well, she she was going to all these meetings and doing all of these things, and she was doing great, and now she's isolative and resentful, and she's just getting more and more sort of erratic. Well, then I'm going to explore that. If they just have a generalized fear, what I'll typically tell them is, I mean, frankly, I don't think that's enough to change custody. I think it's enough to put something in the parenting plan that would trigger a modification hearing, potentially. You can build in, what I like to do, a lot of attorneys I work with like to do it too, is if there really is an issue or a legitimate, genuine concern, then, if, for example, if he, he's doing an exchange with the kid, and if he thinks that she's under the influence, then he has a right to demand,
Oh,
within
right.
an hour or 4 hours or whatever it is, that she go to a certain place and take a certain test. And if she passes it, if she's not on drugs, then he has to pay for it. And if she is, then it triggers a whole bunch of other stuff, kind of thing. I mean, I think courts like to do that. I think that seems reasonable to everybody, unless there's some other kind of history other than what you just talked about. She's gotten loaded every 3 months for the last 10 years, no
Right.
matter what she does. And when she does, she's gone for 30 days, and all of these horrible things happen. And there's just not enough of a history of stability to feel like the kids are safe. I think that's a different story.
Yeah, that's such an interesting, it just goes back to family law, like what you're saying, right? It's very fact specific, especially when you're dealing with addiction, because if someone comes to me and tells me they've either had a drinking or a drug addiction, but they're clean and sober, but they're afraid their husband's going to use their past against them, it really comes down to, like you're saying, it depends. It really depends. Like, what are you doing for your addiction? How long have you been clean and sober? How many times have you relapsed?
And
Because
yeah, and what's your daily log? What's your daily? What do I call it? I like to sort of a day in the life. What does your day in the life look like? What does your day in the life look like for the last year, for the last 5 years?
yeah.
And I ask clients a lot of times to do that. Write down for the last month, the last year, the last 5 years. I want to get a history of what you do and what the other parent does. Write it
Are you
down.
are you talking about, so when, I just had a thought here when you said what's your routine like? Are you talking about what's your routine in terms of parenting, or what's your routine in terms of recovery?
Well, both.
Okay.
What I'm looking for specifically is parenting. I
Okay.
want to know, like, who gets up with the kids in the middle of the night, who puts them to bed, who
Yeah.
brings them, that kind of stuff. But I usually ask them, give me your day in the life, everything, from the moment you get up, what do you do? And I do this, and then I typically do this, and then I typically do that. And then I get to see a pattern, well, then I can ask them, well, do you go to meetings? No, I don't need to go to meetings. Right, that brings us back to that other conversation. Okay, well, you've gotten loaded every 3 months for the last 4 years straight, and you don't go to meetings. What do you think about meetings? Like something's not working.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? But again, that day in the life, that gets to what's sort of been a recurring theme here, which is, how does it impact the parenting? Also, don't forget to look at how it impacts how the parents themselves interact with one another. Because if there's verbal or mental abuse from one
Yeah.
parent or another, that's going to factor in big too. Depending on what it is, maybe the kids see it in front of them, or it creates an atmosphere or a tension of fear, or who knows. But again, that day in the life is very helpful.
Well, and it's also too, when you're talking about, especially, it's such this weird when you compare and contrast, alcohol abuse in terms of marijuana abuse. You definitely see more negative things associated with alcohol abuse, right? People tend to get more DUIs with alcohol than driving under the influence. There's that fear of, I mean, we've all dealt with cases where a parent was drunk picking up their kids to and from school or the activities, and that's a huge fear. Or even you're dealing with the spouse whose husband drinks and he goes into a violent rage every time he drinks. um, so in those situations, it's a lot, you kind of have that concrete evidence to basically tell the court, yes, there's 190 restrictions involved, and because this person behaves this way or does these things when they're drinking, that's why they should do drug and alcohol evaluation and a treatment. And it's kind of interesting how you touched upon that. The first thing you ask people, do you still want to stay married, knowing that perhaps based on your own experience, how much the drinking can negatively, like, almost, do this thing in your head, um, where you treat people differently, and not necessarily realizing it because you're in your addiction. I'm not even talking about like the physical abuse, right? I'm
Yeah,
talking.
sometimes people still love each other very much. I mean, I've
Yeah.
had people reconcile. Go talk to him. You think there's any chance out there? I'm like, okay, go talk to him. Here's what you're going to say. I'll line it out for him. And it's, every once in a while they actually reconcile, which is, of course, I'm
Which,
happy about.
yeah, I love that.
So I've got plenty of work to do. I don't need to gather divorce cases in order to make a living. I want people to stay married if they can. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's unsafe. Sometimes they need to separate for a while and then they'll
Yeah.
reconcile, kind of thing. I mean, we're talking about alcoholism really being the thing to destroy an otherwise loving marriage between two people who still love each other. Then sobriety is going to need to happen, and some time is going to need to go by, and they'll either reconcile or they won't. But yeah, and it's funny with marijuana. I think it tends to be more sort of a lack of involvement than any kind of real scary kind of abuse. It's hard to get violent when you're stoned on pot.
Yeah, it's more of a lack of involvement. Yeah, it's more of that disinterest.
Right.
The
And the
bare minimum of
conversation
parenting is what I'll do.
and the conversation with the court, if that's the case, frankly, I mean, I would probably touch on it, the marijuana use, but the main thrust of a motion or even a requested trial would be that lack of involvement, right? You go back to the daily log. Look, we've got a parent who is thoroughly involved, and so this person should have primary custody. And then we've got a parent who doesn't care. And so if it's just a matter of every other weekend kind of thing,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they're able to kind of pull it together that much, and they do, fine. If they're, I frankly, I don't think I've had a case where the marijuana use was so bad that they couldn't handle every other weekend, that kind of thing. I mean, usually there's
yeah.
other stuff going on besides marijuana.
Well, and it's interesting because sometimes I see this. I don't know, maybe you've seen it. You see a marijuana addiction tied into a gaming addiction, where I had the person, it's like basically my spouse or my ex is just he smokes marijuana and he plays games.
Right, but again, that's okay. So that's a disinterested parent. That's a parent who's not involved, who's not an
Yeah,
active participant in their child's life. That's my argument. Because again, I don't want to get judgy. And in marriages, the last thing I want to do is get in between 15 years of recrimination and resentment. Where the wife wanted to go out to dinner and he didn't care because he was smoking dope with his buddies and playing video games.
yeah.
He's still showing up to work, he's still earning a living, kind of thing. It's none of my business. The point though is the kids don't really know you. You never read them bedtime stories, you never took them to class, you never volunteered in their school, and not because you weren't working all the time, but because you were busy smoking dope and gaming. Okay, well, maybe you should grow up.
But I think the distinction in that lies with, okay, so marijuana and video games. So essentially that parent is just kind of doing the bare minimum as parenting, but that's not enough to get these 191 restrictions to
Right.
basically limit that parent's time.
Yep, you can be a
That's what
shit
you're talking
parent.
about. He's doing the bare minimum of parenting, so just give him every other weekend.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, that's
Yeah,
the thing. People get to be jerks. They get to be bad parents. They don't get to be parents that are so bad that it harms the children. They
yeah,
can be just kind of like kind of a lame dad who doesn't really, okay. That dad still gets to see his kids every once in a while. I mean, the thing to remember is parental rights is a fundamental constitutionally protected right that the courts are not going to take away lightly. And even when there are 191 restrictions, there always has to be a path back to some sort of normal schedule. Oftentimes when you're dealing with addiction, they never are able to do that. But I just think
yeah.
that's important. We're talking about taking away people's children. That should be done thoughtfully and seriously. Uh, you know,
Yeah, and I think that's a really important distinction that you noted right there, that parenting is a fundamental right. And that's just it's a fundamental right that the law will always recognize. And the law's not there to make someone to be that perfect parent or to be that parent that you want them to be.
right?
And I loved how you said too, like the whole point of having a parenting plan, even with 191 restrictions, is not to cut off that other parent's time. Is to basically give that parent parameters to keep the child safe and have that parent get healthy and get well so they can come back into their child's life and be healthy and be that active parent that child, be that present parent that child needs.
Right. Yep.
Well, thank you, Jules, so much for your time. It was great talking to you about about addiction and recovery and just how that impacts into being a family attorney, a family law, a divorce attorney, and what you talk to your clients about. And just it's such a it's just such a big topic, and just there's no easy answers. And honestly, as you said, it's fact specific and it just depends on the circumstances. In closing, is there you have a really interesting background because you started practicing law in 2009. and you and I were talking about that, and you said, well, I had another life before law. So I think it'd be really interesting to tell people what your other life was.
Well, so I was trying to be an actor in Los Angeles for a long time. I graduated high school and moved to LA, and frankly, I got sober at about the same time. So for the first 5 years, I was just kind of sobering up and sort of getting clear-headed. And then after about 5 years of sobriety, I kind of started thinking about what I wanted to do. And I'd been in theater all through high school and done tons of stuff in high school with the theater, and decided I was going to pursue that. So I pursued that for a while, and then I met my wife, and my priorities changed, and I went back to college and started practicing law in 2009. That was a long process. When I decided to go back to college, I had some community college credits, but that was about it. So I finished my lower division at Pasadena City College. I transferred to UCLA. I got my degree in political science and history. And then we moved up here. I took a gap year, and then I went to law school at SU, and the rest is history. So lots of
Well,
lived experience.
I mean, because you have like such this great voice. You have like a theater or radio voice. So I always enjoy talking to you because I love hearing your voice.
Thank you.
You should get into like reading audiobooks.
Yes, I could
Is
do
that
that.
something?
Well, frankly, I like practicing law. So,
Well, maybe when you retire,
yes.
you can like read audiobooks or something. And what do you do in terms of you like we're talking about like I like to talk to people about what do they do in their daily life schedule, be it recovery or parenting. What's your daily recovery schedule like?
So I work from home, and I've got a home office here. And so I never go down to the office. So I'll get up and either get the kids out the door. I try to make them walk to the bus stop on their own to create some independence, but sometimes I have to take them to school. So I'll get them to school one way or the other. And then I'll get some coffee, and I'll wander into work and in my job here. And the firm that I belong to, we have a firm meeting every morning online, a video conference online. And so we'll talk about whatever cases we're dealing with, and then we'll just let that online conference sort of be open for the day. So we're just kind of keeping each other company while we're working, and it's very easy to
Oh,
ask questions and, hey, that thing, and it's without having to pick up the phone. It's nice. It's a good way to not feel alone. I'll have lunch. I'll take our Rottweiler puppy out for a walk sometimes. Get the kids, and we'll make dinner. Usually at about 10 a.m. I try to log into a meeting that I like to go to for my recovery. That's it. When the season comes, we like to take our trailer out and go camping, and just sort of do some traveling. And so when the pandemic restrictions lift, we'll be going down to the Keys, which we like to go to. And my wife's family has
wow.
a place up in Toronto, up north of Toronto. We go there. So, just kind of living the dream.
Living the dream and having that home office.
Yes, which is the dream.
Yeah. I know, who would have thought, right? Because before COVID, you were going into the office.
Well,
So,
it's funny. In November of 2019, I had decided that's when I let go of my office. I had an office on 48th Avenue in Linwood for many, many, many years.
yeah.
And I decided I didn't need to have that expense. So I let go of the office, and that's when I built my home office.
Oh, okay.
And so I kind of started doing this a few months before the pandemic hit anyway. So it was really, I don't know, kismet or serendipity
God
or
shot.
whatever it is. Yeah,
It's a
a
God
God
shot.
shot. I mean, really, it was just perfect timing.
Well, thank you again for your time today, Jules. And again, I am speaking with Jules Butler, family law divorce attorney, and you can be reached at the law offices of Vic Lamb. And do you kind of want to like shout out your phone number or something?
Oh,
Want to get a hold of you?
yes. What is it? I don't even
Or,
know.
or your email.
Yeah, let's do that, because it's jules.butler, JULES.BUTLER at viclamlaw, VICLAMLAW.com.
Or they can just Google Jules Butler
Yeah.
attorney.
You
Yeah.
can go to the WSBA.org website and do the lawyer directory and type Jules Butler, and I'll pop right up.
Well, thank you again for your time, Jules, and thank you out there for listening to another episode of the Akiona Law podcast, wherein we discuss anything and everything that intersects in the areas of family law and divorce. I'm Lonnie Akiona. Until next time, stay safe and healthy.
The information in this podcast is general advice only and should not in any respect be relied on as specific legal advice.